what matters in this opening speech by the UN Secretary General Mr. Antonio Guterres on the occasion of 78th session of the General Assembly in New York are the following keywords and key takeaways: digital divide, AI and emerging threats, women's rights, gender parity, admission of international systems and their failure, climate change, sustainable development goals, wars and politics, conflicts, compromise, reform of international bodies, fracture, fragmentation, multipolar, and multilateral. Yeah. So those are the things which have been talked about in his opening remarks, and he expounds further on each of these topics. But of essence, are these topics one can connect the dots by going through different documents available in different in the public domain on different websites or government agencies, and make your own sense of what's being talked about. But what is critical is the fact that the UN Secretary General talks of these things from his vantage point, from the bird's eye view that he would have. In fact, not just bird's eye view, he would even be aware and privy of the ground realities of a lot of things going on in the world. So the thing that struck the most was the opening part of his speech, whereby he acknowledges the difficult situation in Libya, in northern African region per se, but Libya in specific. The earthquake in Morocco and the floods in Libya have been devastating and need urgent help from the global community. One of the statements that has struck the most in this whole speech on a humane level is the following quote: bodies are washing ashore from the same Mediterranean Sea where billionaires sunbathe on their super yachts. That summarizes the level of depravity that exists on this planet, and the inequality which has still not been cured, if one would say, from this world. And more so, the world is becoming unhinged and divisive. He talks of the existential threats of disruptive technologies such as AI, and the digital divide because of the internet and hate speech and polarity that has come about. He talks about the multipolarity of the world that is developing, which in a way is good because it brings the chance of opportunities and justice and balance in the international relations compared to the old guard, whereby it was an old world order in favor of certain countries, which is being challenged by this new world order. And while at world order, it would be pertinent at this point in time to probably go through the amazing works of Henry Kissinger in the World Order, in the book called World Order, and Ray Dalio's The New World Order or The Changing World Order. Mr. Guterres talks of the multilateral institutions and their need. However, there is a colonial overhang in the currently existing or the current state of the existing multilateral institutions, and the need for reform is urgent and indispensable. That's what he talks of. In fact, he talks of the fact that reform or fracture. So either we go about reforming those institutions, such as the financial institution or the financial system, international financial system, uh, or we let it rupture. So reform or rupture, that's what he mentions and very pertinently points out. The world has changed, our institutions have not. Another key uh, statement that can be underlined from his speech: the divisions between North and South in terms of developed and developing economies, and East and West in terms of hegemony of the West versus the rising power of the East, is increasing the tensions and the strain in the global geopolitics. He also talks about reforming as he said, reforming the institutions, and one of them being Security Council, which was formed in the aftermath of, or in the backdrop of Second World War. But there are new participants which need to get an equal footing and a place on the table. So there is this need for the reform so that different perspectives are heard, are accepted, welcomed, and that would help take the world in a specific direction, which is good for all. Uh, it does talk about the fact that democracy in a lot of places, in a lot of regions, is under threat due to authoritarianism, inequalities, rising inequalities. Hate speech is rising, which has again circles back to the divisiveness on or the digital divide. He brings about a very interesting word which you don't generally hear a ranking official or a person from a place of authority speaking, which is a compromise. And he equates compromise with diplomacy, leadership, politics. Um, he pertinently and he correctly points out that compromise is how we move forward. You cannot have a lopsided negotiation whereby one party wins all, which creates dissonance, which creates friction between the parties. So he talks of compromise, that the world needs to learn how to compromise, or maybe it has forgotten to compromise, come to terms to agree and move forward and see how it develops and then take another step into. He talks of different regions which are disturbed because of this, lack of leadership or agreement to compromise. Classic case would be Middle East. Then there's Sudan, Myanmar. Latin American countries are going through that similar thing, whereby leaders, strong leaders with very uncompromising and unyielding politics are coming up. Case in point being the war going on in between Russia and Ukraine, disrupting the whole economy in the Europe. He talks of the fact that nuclear disarmament is almost coming to a standstill as more and more players are trying to arm themselves, while most of the countries are already in disarray. Case in point, Sudan, Congo, Afghanistan, Syria. So it makes things more risky as more participants might try to arm themselves to be able to counter the offensive by others. Um, he does talk of something which is interesting, the need for more funding for institutions like UN and its different arms. But in regards to this, there's an interesting question that a journalist asked on another conference that happened on 13th, and the journalist asks very directly that why is UN headquartered in New York when New York is the costliest city in the world? If United Nations is for all the nations, you might as well have it in a more cost-effective country of the world. But we all know the reason and the politics behind that, and to which the Secretary General refers to in that response. Uh, that they've tried the back office and this and that, and it has not worked. It is obviously dependent on the member states to be able to come to consensus to move the headquarters and so on and so forth. But that circles back to this point, the fact that the Secretary General mentions in his speech of the need for funds, and he does talk about a lot of costs have been, cost cutting had to be looked into, and a lot of steps had to be taken to be able to manage the funds in a better way. Maybe it's time to include this part as well in the reform that he's talking about. Uh, he's say something. Another remarkable statement that he mentions is that in the charter, UN charter says that uh, yeah, we the people. It does not mean we the men, and there's where the gender equality is very very uh, pertinent and relevant to everyone. Equal opportunities and equal pay is still not existent, is not a norm in most of the countries and most of the places. So not only that, he refers to the fact that sexual and reproductive rights of women are under uh, are being suppressed in many parts and being rolled back from the levels that we had achieved. So he talks of that, and climate. The big thing is climate. So clearly, we've not met the Millennium Development Goals, and then Sustainable Development Goals took a new shape and form in around 2010, I believe. That's what he refers to with 1.5 degrees target for the global temperature rise. We have to manage within that, within which there are different initiatives he talks of that could be taken and that should be taken and adhered to, but there is lack of consensus, uh, which needs to come from the advanced economies as well as the developing economies. There are a couple of initiatives laid out as a Climate Solidarity Pact, acceleration agenda, Climate Solidarity Pact, which whereby the big emitters are asked to make extra efforts, and the acceleration agenda helps to supercharge such renewable investments. Uh, Obviously, controlling the old forms of energy such as coal and gas, limiting them to or bringing them to net or to zeroize them absolutely by 2030s and 2040. 2030 for the developed economies and 2040s for the developing economies and proposals of such sort are something that he's talked about and referred to, or a green climate fund of $100 billion for the developing countries to be able to come on board with the climate action imperatives. He interestingly brings another point I've never been able to come across this one: early warning coverage. So there's something called an early warning coverage whereby they are referring or they're proposing that everybody in the world is covered under the early warning coverage from the effects of climate change. I find that overstretched, but we'll have to read more on that to find more details on that. That's that, and digital divide has obviously increased the inequalities, and is the disparity is just increasing, is in terms of divisiveness, disinformation, or the other benefits such as medical education and so on and so forth. The fear being that AI might just amplify these, leaving the world further more divided and unequal than we already have. So the Secretary General refers to a need for a separate entity to be able to cater to such disruptive technologies as AI, and be able to work on framework and regulations and so on and so forth, and build consensus to be able to tap the benefits and mitigate the risks. Well, that's that, and just that these key points are something that one would want to think further about and get more information to be able to connect the dots and develop one's own perspectives about them. The biggest takeaway for me have been two, without undermining or taking anything away from the importance of the other keywords and key takeaways. But these two would stick with me. One is the fact that there's a sort of a subtle admission of the failure of the international bodies. We all can see the fact that most of the Security Council members have skipped or missed out on this particular General Assembly, which kind of refers to the fracture or fragmentation that's happening. And Secretary General alluded to this even in the G20 summit. The second part has been that he's talked of is, in fact, that talks of the international failure of the international system, such as the financial system and so on, which only puts debt burdens on the countries. For example, Africa is now in a situation whereby its interest payments are far more beyond the debt. And in fact, he alludes to this in his speech. One can go on the website and refer to this, which is a stunning piece of fact. And if that's the case, then obviously it does not work. So first thing is the fracture or the fragmentation that's happening, and the second thing is of reform that is required in the international systems. Africa spends more on debt interest than on healthcare. Okay, that's the one. So servicing their own debts has put them in a spiral whereby they're not able to take care of their basic needs. Fracture and reform. Two key takeaways from coming from the UN Secretary General, no less. Something to think really deeply about. Connect the dots. Let's find answers of our own. Not be distracted by the interpretations of of different people. There's no need. Documents like these are out in the open in the public. All we need to do is take time, read them, find our own key takeaways, form our own opinion. There's nothing wrong about forming our own opinion. It's a little better than just relying on somebody's comments online or media channels interpretation, one side or the other, and then being at the mercy of that. So these documents are there on the websites of government agencies, international organizations, the research bodies, white papers are there, there are reports, there are press releases, statements. It's just that we need to put some time and then go through them. That's what I'm doing here. This is for my self-consumption again. I always put this in my description, and but again, I am making this for my own understanding. By speaking, I understand a lot. In fact, it makes you think. It makes you think. There are some people who understand, or who learn by interacting, who learn by reading, who learn by writing. I learn by probably just talking out like this, and hoping there will be insightful comments coming in or any feedbacks whereby I can educate myself. I'll be more than happy. The others I would disregard. So please don't waste your time. You have better things to do in life, I'm sure. I'll keep this initiative going for my own sake and the sake of others who will join into this journey. And if at all you find this useful and you've managed to come to this point of the video, I need improvements. I know that I need to make this more concise, more fluid, more fluent, and and more engaging, if anything. So opening remarks are here from the UN Secretary General. It's a quick read. Anyone can go onto the website of the UN and find the press releases and read it for yourselves. Always rely on the original document. There are no shortcuts to that. This is just a gist and my takeaway and a personal opinion and a personal takeaway. Well, that's that. I'll come up with the next one. There's on AI, the insights. The Senate conducted a closed-door insight forum last week. There are a couple of documents or press releases that were released on the Senate website. I have seen that. There are 4 senators, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats. I think Chuck Schumer led the initiative, and let's see what he's talked about in that forum with the leading techie billionaires, and see where it is going from there. The AI regulation. Well, thank you. Anyone joining in? If not, I appreciate that as well. Have a good one.